Everybody's talking at me. I don't hear words they're saying, only the echoes of my mind. People stop and stare. I can't see their faces, only the shadows of their eyes.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Everyone good? Is that on? It is. All right, good evening. I'm going to get set here for this. My name is Michael Smith. I'm with the Tulsa World, and I write about movies and a little bit of everything else there, and tonight we're going to talk with Tim about movies and a little bit more. And as he's one of Tulsa's favorite sons, especially in the field of entertainment. If what we're going to do here looks a little bit like maybe say the inside the actor's studio, well, that's probably about right. It won't exactly be that. It may resemble something like that. We may stop short of asking Tim his favorite curse word, but we may ask him that anyway. As to our guest, he's one of the busiest working actors in the industry, and he's one of the best. He has taken on large roles, small roles, for more than 25 years now, and he's best known as one of the consummate character actors on screens both large and small. He's also an award-winning writer, director, producer of multiple films. He's also an acclaimed playwright who continues to produce new works. And he is a loving husband and father of 3 boys. And as you will see, he is intelligent and humble, talented, and he's the kind of guy who has a lot of friends both inside and outside of the industry. He works on films and television projects inside and outside Hollywood. He lives in New York with his family, but at heart he is an Oklahoman and he is a native Tulsan. Will everybody help me welcome, please, Mr. Tim Blake Nelson.
Thank you.
I think we've got some clips to show, some trailers to show, a little bit, maybe some family photo here very early. Very good, very good. Tim, you were born in Tulsa in 1964 to Ruth and Don Nelson. I believe we've got a family photo that we can put up. Now, I'll give you this so you don't have to crick your neck. I'll let you identify any or all of the people in that photo you might care to.
Yeah, this is from a party that my mother, who's in the middle in the blue dress, the blonde woman in the middle, threw for her parents, who are her father is just below her, and then to the left is her mother. That's Kate and Herman Kaiser, and my mother is Ruth Nelson. She's here actually. Where are you, Mom? Right there. I'm the very homely-looking kid, way over on the left. And then my sister is just going down the first row. That's my sister Pam. Again, I guess it's the second row. Again, my grandmother Kate Kaiser, my grandfather Herman Kaiser, my brother Mike Nelson, who also produced the first film I wrote and directed. Below, on the first row, are my cousins Emily and Leah Kaiser, and then. Just going back to my right is Betty Kaiser, my aunt, George Kaiser, my uncle, and there's my mother and my father next to my mother, and then my brother Randy, who lives very near to me in New York City and is still one of my best friends. And then to his right is Philip Kaiser, a cousin. And that's the family photo from, I think, 1980.
March of 1980, if I remember right. Yes. You would have been
I would
15.
Yeah, I guess in March of 1980, I would have been 15.
Almost 16.
And if you look at me there, and you're at all worried if you want to be an actor, that you have to be appealing to the eye, I think that hopefully will dispel such worries.
Well, I can tell you I'm very jealous because we're the same age, and at that point I had hair just as thick as yours. So from that jumping off point, let's tell us about your time as a youth in Tulsa, what you may have been doing, about your upbringing, your family, the community you grew up in here, and what you were doing with your brothers as a youth.
Well, I guess we were by this age, so I guess it's 1980, I was in high school, and I was somewhat reformed as a student, in part thanks to this gentleman right here. And this was my high school Latin teacher is here, which is kind of amazing. Ron Palma. And once I took Latin, which I took before I met Mr. Palma, when I was in the 8th grade, and I kind of turned around as a student as a result of, weirdly, studying Latin. And then my appreciation for it deepened in high school, and it really kept me on the rails as a student, which allowed me to get into a decent college because I was suddenly taking school a little more seriously than I had been before. But I guess growing up in Tulsa, I was quietly but sometimes very loudly unruly. I wasn't such a great student before high school, but I guess in terms of really good parenting, my mother allowed my siblings and me to be who and what we wanted to be. There was a lot of freedom within some pretty strict lines in the way that we were raised. So there was a lot of, we needed to do well in school, and there was a lot of punishment if we didn't. And so eventually, because of Latin, in large part, I sorted that out. But within that, we had, I was allowed what I would consider an ideal Tulsa youth. Back then, in the 70s, I could disappear by myself and go fishing. There was a pond by the Williams house. Off Lewis on by that fire station, just on the other side, north of Lewis, where that fire station is on 36th Street, I think.
36.
Yeah, and just to the east of that, in that next block, I would just be able to go and fish, and my mother let me do that, and I spent a huge amount of time by myself doing that. And we would go to Jamaica over the summer and in the winter as well. And I loved fishing, and I would again often do it by myself. And I was allowed to do it by myself. I was given the space to do it by myself, and there was not a lot of worrying about that. And I think that prepared me psychologically to do a lot of the work that I end up doing now, which is when I'm writing a script that I'm going to direct, I'm doing it by myself. And I've got to wake up in the apartment and go to the computer by myself. And as an actor, ultimately, whether I'm auditioning or whether I'm now, I don't audition so much anymore, but it's very much until you get to the set a solitary enterprise. And if you're serious about your work, and I'm pretty serious about it when I play a role, a lot of the prep work is really done by myself with a script. And I think that the freedom that I had in Tulsa to go off on my own, and that my parents didn't have to worry about that, and that my mother even encouraged it, and encouraged me to be who and what I wanted to be and to follow my own impulses, very much prepared me for what is not always an easy life, and one that really does often involve solitude, rejection, the fish not biting, and so I feel for that, and we could spend the whole rest of the evening with my panegyrizing Tulsa and how extraordinary I think growing up here was, and I hope still is. But that would just be one aspect of it.
Were there creative endeavors that you were already undertaking as a youth, outside of acting classes at Weldon as an 8-year-old?
Right. Again, you know, my mother said, "You're going to these acting classes. You seem to be you seem to like being watched performing. So we're gonna put you here, so that I don't have to watch it." But yeah, I mean, I think I did a lot of I think that what creative people end up doing when they're young is preparing themselves for a creative life without really knowing that's what they're doing. And that can be everything from dealing with people thinking you're strange or weird or offbeat or not so much liking the way you look and therefore you're not so popular. The way you are being very easy to malign and ridicule or ignore or insult, whether you're small or skinny or overweight or you have acne or you don't know when it's appropriate to shut up, or you're always trying to make people laugh and you're often failing, and a lot of the hits you take as a result of that, you're not understanding it at the time, but if you end up living a creative life, you're being prepared for the hits you're going to take later. And in those moments when you do make people laugh, and something that, an imitation that you do, or lampooning the teacher, or, you know, and you don't get in trouble, and you get away with it, and it's even appreciated, and you get positive feedback, and you start learning what works. Those are the positive aspects of finding your own voice creatively. And so I was very much a cut-up in grade school. And I was a terrible student, and my school, Holland Hall, tried to kick me out twice, which is funny. It is funny now, but it was really... It was really serious. They just didn't want me there anymore. They didn't think I was smart enough to handle the future curriculum, and they thought that I was disruptive and difficult. And so they just didn't want to, they neither wanted to put up with it anymore, nor did they want to remediate because I was not a good student. And my parents fought to keep me there. I think it's because they liked the school and not because they didn't want to have to deliver two children to two different schools. So I think it was more than the convenience of having all the kids at one school. I actually know it was. I only bring that up to to point out that I was a difficult kid when it came to school and behaving myself. And learning how to find my way to navigate a mainstream system while also remaining true to myself and a viable creative person who could continue to do the stuff that I wanted to do, which was to do skits and make people laugh and write and perform, but not get kicked out of school and do well enough not to get in trouble at home. Again, all of this was a lesson for how to live a creative life, because that stuff doesn't go away. In fact, as an adult, it's simply writ large. And you have to be this unpredictable creative force in your own projects and in other people's projects, but you've also got to behave yourself and be a person who's considered responsible and reliable, and with whom people will want to work again. And so growing up here and learning how to be unruly within the system is how I would describe my own sort of version of creative schooling that happened here, even though I didn't know that that's what was going on.
Well, your parents won that fight.
Yes, they did.
And you graduated from Holland Hall School in the class of 1982. Let's see if we've got that classic senior photo. There we are. From there, you were selected to attend the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute as well. Here in Oklahoma, you went on to Rhode Island for an Ivy League education at Brown University, where you studied the classics, and we've seen that education has certainly continued to influence your thoughts and your filmmaking, as we will see. And there was a plan to enter academia, really, but your mother advised that maybe you should consider your options, if I remember right. And basically, have you given some more serious thought to being an actor?
Yes, my mother came up to visit me, and what's wonderful about my mother is one of the many peculiarities about my mother, but you can't blame her for this, is that when she would go to visit me at Brown, she didn't like the hotels in Providence because there was this Ritz-Carlton in Boston that she liked, and so she would stay there and have me come up and visit her there. And so I was having room service with her, and she said, "What are you going to do this summer?" This was after my freshman year. And I said, well, I'm going to come home to Tulsa and live in the house with you and get some sort of a job. One summer I'd worked at Tulsa Beef in high school to pay off some legal bills. And I'd also worked at Sound Warehouse, thanks to my friend Jody Parker, who I think is here in the audience, who got me that job when I was in high school. And I figured I'd get some job at either of those places. And she said, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, maybe become a classicist. And she said, nothing would, that's great. If you ended up being a classicist, that's great. And my mother had actually taught grade school Latin as a substitute. And so, it actually hit a spiritual sweet spot with her. So she meant that. But she said, you liked acting in high school, and this is a moment in your life where you don't have a wife, you don't have children, you don't have any significant responsibilities. I don't even think you have a girlfriend. And I said, thanks for reminding me. And she said, why don't you just experiment with your summer? Use this time in a way that could be more useful than coming home. And trust me, I'd love for you to come home. I'd love the company. And I'd love to have you at home, but you need to do what's going to be best for you in your long-term future, and this is really valuable time. And so she said, why don't you get a job at a summer theater? And I said, Mom, those are really difficult to get. And she said, well, I know some people. And so she helped get me an audition for a theater that was in part sponsored by and hosted by her alma mater, and at Bryn Mawr College. And I auditioned, and they took me, and I spent the summer acting, and that was it. I came back to Brown for my sophomore year and had changed my plans.
Well, you you did finish Brown, you did consider acting, and you were selected to attend Juilliard in the field of drama, 1986, if I have that right. And you were a member of Group 19, finishing in 1990. You were in that class.
Along with, you were going to say.
Oh, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Let's set this
Sorry.
up properly here.
Sorry.
You gave me that photo for a reason. In that class with, among others, Laura Linney. And we have a photo you've supplied us with. If you can tell me what we're looking at here, I believe this is a third-year production.
Yeah, that's Heartbreak House, and I'm Shotover, and she's Ellie. And I'm this superannuated guy. He's 88, and she's meant to be, well, she's basically her age, actually a little younger. And we get married in this Shaw play. And it was a wonderful, it was the best role I ever was given at Juilliard. It was great. It was in our third year, and Laura and I went to college together also at Brown. She came in, she transferred from Northwestern her for her sophomore year at Brown. And then also in the class, I'm sure you were going to say.
Of course. Also in the class, to your surprise, was another Tulsa native. And as you have told me before, that meant that there were 2 people from Tulsa in that class of 20, in that group, from more than 1,000 people who auditioned. And that person, if you would tell us who that was?
Jeannie Triplehorn. And at the audition, we auditioned on the same day. And I don't know how, or I don't quite know how we got to talking. I really don't, because I did not know Jeannie. And I said, and we made the connection, and I said, you're an Okie? And I had not revealed that I was from Tulsa yet. And she looked at me with the hairy eyeball, because she did not like being called an Okie. And I said, I'm an Okie. I'm proud. I'm proud of it. And she said, oh, okay.
Okay, well, that's quite a class there. Had, let me see, John Tenney was in that class as well.
David Aaron Baker, a Broadway actress named Marla Schaffel. But, it's very selective, Juilliard, obviously, even more so now. But the odds against success in this industry, for a lot of reasons, make it so that really about, I'd say, 20% of Juilliard grads actually end up making a career.
Well, very impressive. 30 years later, almost, both you and Jeannie are going at it, representing Tulsa well. Of course, Jeannie is also coming to the Circle Cinema for the film festival this week. We'll be here on Friday night. And as she finished at Juilliard and she looked to begin a career in acting, you did as well. Please tell us about that early pursuit, those early years. perhaps by elaborating maybe on this quote that you gave to Lynn Smith of the Los Angeles Times. This was some years after the fact that you said, for most of the 1990s, I was begging to be in any movie that would have me. I can't tell you the level of disappointment I experienced when I was not offered the role of one of the Ferengi in Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, I pursued everything relentlessly, passionately. All I wanted to do was just get experience in front of the camera, and that's what any of us. That's how any of us feels when we're coming out, pretty much. There was some stuff that was put in front of me for which I was meant to audition that was just simply too silly, and I would say no, but very seldom did that happen. But I was also, I couldn't, because I'd learned at Juilliard, because in my fourth year, this was after Heartbreak House, I'd had run-ins with the head of the school, and my casting in the fourth year wasn't so great. And I learned at Juilliard, thanks to that, never to be, or to do everything I could not to be beholden to the decisions of others. And so while I was at Juilliard, even before the casting blow of the fourth year, I was writing always. From second year on, every day I was writing. I was constantly having conversations with people, remembering conversations with people, and writing dialogue. I just never stopped. It was just constant. Just every free moment I had, and I would stay up late at night and write and write and write and write and write. And what seemed decent enough, I would always put on. And I challenged myself that every single semester at Juilliard, I would put up a play. And so by the end of Juilliard, they had put one of my first full-length play in the rep with classmates, and they produced it. And so I was lucky enough, and it wasn't all luck because I had done this, but I think luck is involved in any success. To be able to graduate from Juilliard as a burgeoning playwright as well. And this very strange thing happened, which was that two of my classmates decided to take a little one-act play that I'd written. It was really about an 8-minute scene. And they distilled it down into 2 minutes. They took a section of it and they used it as their league scene, which is where the Juilliard class is presented to the industry as actors. And so agents and casting directors and directors and playwrights, they come and watch you, and you have 4 minutes. Each student has 4 minutes to present themselves. You get 2 scenes, 4 minutes. 2 minutes a scene. So I had in the rep, I had my 4 minutes, and again, you talk about luck. It just happened that on that day, my partners and I we not only had picked good scenes, but they went really well. And so I had a lot of opportunities out of the leagues. But then these other 2 students did a scene that I wrote. And so all these queries came in, were interested in Tim Nelson as an actor and a writer. And so I was able to graduate with an acting agent and a playwriting agent. And that was a game changer for me, because I was able to spend the 90s, yes, absolutely desperate for any acting work I could get, but with this other career that I could control to a much more profound degree. Because I could get up every morning, and this goes back to getting up and going fishing by myself, and then writing while I was at Juilliard every day. I could get up every morning when I was out of work as an actor and spend my time really productively and not be sitting there desperate for the phone to ring for an audition or for feedback from an audition. And then when I was going into auditions, I was just a little bit less desperate to get the job. And so I was, therefore, and everybody knows about this because it's not just in the arts, it's all of us. When you're desperate and you feel that you absolutely need something and have to have it, in a converse way, it makes you less inclined to take the risks and to have the confidence that make you more appealing. But because I was writing every day and I was getting really excited about what I was writing, then sometimes I was actually annoyed to go to auditions. And so I had a kind of insouciance or a nonchalance about going and meeting somebody for whether it was I mean, I did the weirdest roles in commercials. I mean, and I would walk in, or to even auditions for plays, and I would just have a little bit more confidence. And so, yes, I got out of Juilliard and I was absolutely desperate for any work possible. And I could tell you stories that are they're just pathetic about my oscillating down, if I was talking about indifference, and then sometimes I was just absolutely pathetically desperate too. Like to be on Star Trek Voyager. But mostly I had this card in my back pocket of being able to write. And that made all the difference, and it made a huge difference. And I started having this playwriting career. And that was great. So I'll say to anybody who's either a parent of young people or any students in the audience, if you can write, particularly now when social media is just eroding that ability to such a profound extent, because we can communicate in such shorthand, the ability to write, conversely, is more and more important because it's more rare. So urge your kids to write, and nobody's asking for my advice, but I'm just giving it. I'm sorry. And if you're a student, nurture that.
So would you put your hand to your head like this? Is that more for one role over the other, or just your
I don't know. I've learned a lot over the years, and that was it's interesting. I'm taking some chances there, and I suppose that's really good. I mean, there's play, I haven't seen either of those probably for 20 years. I always ask myself, well, what would I do differently? Would I have prepped differently? So yeah, it's fine. I don't know. Sometimes I see certain stuff and wonder why I still have a career.
Well, as you said, you were writing. And during this time, of special notice your decision to return to one of those plays of yours, an award-winning play of yours, Eye of God, which you adapted into the 1997 film which brought you home to Tulsa to make your first film as both writer and director, with your brother Michael as producer, of this morality tale about a young Oklahoma girl who marries a born-again ex-convict and finds herself pulled down by his bleak vision of righteousness and retribution. You filmed in the Collinsville area, Skiatook area, a few other areas, the Tulsa County area, with a remarkable cast for a first-time writer-director. Lead actors Martha Plimpton and Kevin Anderson, with a supporting cast that included Emmy winner Hal Holbrook, Oscar nominee Richard Jenkins, Emmy winner Margot Martindale, and Emmy winner and Tulsa actress Mary Kay Place. Let's watch the trailer for Eye of God. If you would, please tell us about turning this story of love and desperation and faith into, bringing it to your hometown to film, and tell us about the first-time writer-director, the labor of love that is indie filmmaking.
Well, I very much owe the idea to do it was my brother Mike's, who saw the play at Seattle Rep, and he knew that I was interested in writing plays, and that I was a playwright, but I was also interested in writing films. And he said, when he saw the play at Seattle Rep, he said this would make a wonderful film. And I said, great, I'll write it. And he said, and you should direct it and I'll produce it. And so really the idea was his. And then yes, it was a lot of it was a lot of labor, because I had never written a screenplay before. And so I read a lot of screenplays, in addition to the ones that I was reading already as an actor. Mm-hmm. And then also with an eye to directing, I just luckily at the time started getting cast in larger roles in films and television. And so when you're on a film or a TV show and you're on it for the run of the show, you don't work every day. You have probably, if you're a character actor, maybe a half to 3/4 of your days are days off. And particularly if you're a young character actor and they're not concerned about your time because it's not particularly expensive, they'll schedule you for the whole run, but you'll have all these days off. And so I would just not take days off. So when they didn't need me as an actor, I would go to the set anyway and watch. And when I was meant to be waiting in my trailer on the days that I was working because they didn't need me yet, I would go to the set and watch. And there's a phenomenon on larger budget projects called multi-camera. So there's the A camera, but if they have enough money, there'll be a B and sometimes even a C camera to shoot stuff at the same time if they can afford to rent the equipment and hire the people to operate that equipment. And so I learned very quickly that the guys operating B camera were a little bit removed from the center of things. They were sort of on the penumbra of the what was going on, just right out there at the edge, shooting in, usually with a long lens, to get some detail or coverage of a secondary character. And that they were usually run by younger, aspiring DPs, aspiring directors, aspiring filmmakers. And they were usually my age, because I was in my late 20s at the time, early 30s. And so I would just hang out with them and talk with them. And they would love to talk about how everything was working, and I just started to treat it as a film school for myself. And so, with my brother's encouragement and kind of creating this special ad hoc film school for myself, and reading a lot of screenplays in addition to the ones that I was reading for my day job, acting, I wrote the screenplay and got ready to direct it, and then we came down here and he produced it, and I got to write and direct it. And it was a really fantastic experience, and one that in many ways I haven't been able to duplicate, just because it was my brother, and we had our spats. It wasn't always easy, but I never felt that it was about anything other than making the best movie possible, and I think that he would say the same thing. And he's a wonderful producer in his own right. He was just in Europe doing, the show Patriot? Does anybody watch that? He produced line produced the second season of that, and has done a lot of movies in his own right.
Well, the result was an exceptional first-time film for a writer-director, and you don't have to just take my word for it. Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly called Eye of God an original and gripping achievement, adding spare, elegant, and harrowing. This trickily plotted tale of murder within the desolation of small-town Oklahoma attains a disturbing power that can earn comparison with those true-life novels of American brutality, In Cold Blood and The Executioner's Song. What do you recall about reading those first reviews?
I did. That was nice of Owen. Owen, I know, because he gave "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" an F.
Moving on. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, but he's been a champion actually of the movies I've made as a writer director. He loved Gray Zone. He was very supportive of Gray Zone, and Leaves, and I don't know that I ever read what he wrote about Anesthesia, but he's been very supportive.
Well, very good.
Except for Oh Brother.
Well, we're dealing with some pretty difficult issues here, and in right around that time in The Thin Red Line as well, the Oscar-nominated war film, that you were working on that when Eye of God was being released into theaters. You were in Australia in a war film with a giant cast, and with director Terrence Malick, who has his own Oklahoma roots. Tell us about that experience, perhaps maybe the difference in scale between that production and, say, An Eye of God.
Yeah, I mean, again, I could go on and on about the experience of The Thin Red Line, and it was incredibly valuable to me as a filmmaker watching Terry work. It was also incredibly humbling, often humiliating, and very rewarding and very difficult. And ultimately, like most of the actors in the movie, I was cut out of it. I think I ended up having one scene of any significance in the final cut of the film. And that was true for the lead of the film, Adrian Brody, as well. And other actors, John C. Reilly was mostly cut out. We were all very much at Terry's editorial mercy. The original script of that was 235 pages. And a film script should be around 100 pages. He filmed over 2 million feet of film. So he filmed enough just through the constant improvisation that we did in Australia, probably for about a 7 or 8 hour film. And he used to say, even while we were there, and the writing was on the wall. I knew that I would barely be in the movie, even while I was spending 5 months there, 5.5 months actually. And he would say, I wish that I could just make an 8 hour picture in 1.5 to 2 hour installments, and we could just have each picture almost like a mini series. And he was in a sense ahead of his time, because now that would be quite extraordinary. I guess just watching the way that this brilliant filmmaker seemed to discover what the movie was as the movie was being filmed was something I'd never encountered, and really I suppose I haven't encountered it since. I know other filmmakers do work this way, but I don't think, just because Hollywood was so hungry for Terry to make his return. Do folks know about Terry Malick? So he's a filmmaker, and I recommend you see these 2 movies. He made 2 movies in the 70s, one called Badlands, and then he followed that up a few years later. I think Badlands was 73, and Days of Heaven was 78. Is that correct? Yeah. And they're 2 landmark independent films in American cinema. They're just gorgeous. And Terry, as Michael was implying, has roots in Bartlesville, Texas, and Bartlesville. For reasons that annoy me, he claims Texas more than he does Oklahoma. And I just want to punch him. So then he made these 2 films, and then he disappeared. And I mean, he really disappeared. He was actually in Europe is where he was, but he disappeared, and even when he would correspond with people, there would be no return address, not even a name on the envelope. And he still does that when he writes you. There's no name or address. It's just your address and a blank, otherwise, except for the stamp and the government stamp over the stamp, that's it. And then he decided to come back to Hollywood because he got remarried to his high school sweetheart from St. Stephen's School in Austin. And she encouraged him to get back into filmmaking. And so he decided he'd always wanted to make a war film based on the James Jones novel Thin Red Line. And the studios at that time, this was before even DVDs, were desperate to have him back because it was at a time where you could still really monetize a big budget art film. You really can't do that so much anymore, which is why a place like Circle is so unbelievably important and why Clark is a hero. And so they gave Terry $50 million to go off to Australia, and it was probably more, but that's the budget we were told, to go off to Australia. We all worked, well, I actually, compared to what I usually made, I was compensated just fine. But if you look, the cast is George Clooney and Sean Penn and Woody Harrelson and John Travolta and John Cusack, Jared Leto. It goes on and on. It's an insane cast. And those guys weren't paid, so they weren't paid their quotes. And so he really did have probably about $45 million just for production, which was a lot. And he had 100 days to shoot an art film. And he wrote this 235-page script. He had Final Cut. And everybody tacitly understood that the script was just because he had to give him a script, but he was just going to go down and do whatever the hell he wanted in Australia. And that's what he did. And so it was, again, another film school for me, even though I was, it was a humiliating, really difficult experience for all of us. And I can tell a little story as to why. But I got to watch a guy make his movie with all the studio resources you could imagine, that all the studio resources he could want while he was making the movie. And so he basically every day would go and ignore his own script and kind of vamp all day and figure it out. And it was devastatingly irresponsible if it was any other filmmaker. But because that's the way he worked, he was being allowed to do the Terrence Malick technique that he'd used in these tiny micro-budget indie films in the 70s on a big film. And the results are mixed, but it's a great, I think there are great aspects to the movie. And watching him work that way on that scale, even though I wasn't going to do it, taught me how to make my third play, The Gray Zone, into a movie, because that is also a war movie, and I just learned so much from how Terry covered these scenes, covered war scenes in a wildly subjective way that was just incredibly clever and smart. And then I also got to watch him figure it out in real time. Not just come with storyboards and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. But we all got to watch a guy think it through. Why that was difficult is that you'd have a scene, say we were playing a scene, and it was your biggest scene in the movie, where you had all the dialogue. Your linchpin scene, and this happened to me, my linchpin scene. So we'll switch it. So it's my linchpin scene. Just took it away from you. And he would just, he's a guy, and this is his strength. He preternaturally loses interest in what he knows eventually he feels is not going to work. And so if he lost interest, you were just toast. And he would lose interest often for reasons that had nothing to do with you. But if you're an actor, you're preternaturally sensitive to being rejected, turned away, dismissed. And so he would say, well, we're going to shoot this scene we'll shoot the master from over here. So that's the shot that shows the two of us in space. And he would shoot it from behind me. And then he said, and then we're going to come in and cover Michael listening to you. And he would do a tighter shot of Michael, and he said, oh, I really love what's going on with Michael's eyes. Let's get a really tight shot of Michael's eyes. And then he would shoot Michael's eyes, and then he said, I think we have it. And you would just go home and just say, this is the scene, the whole scene, my scene. And it was all about Michael listening to me, and it was on my back. And it was a great early lesson for me to learn, which is it's a director's medium. You got to trust that guy. or woman, and you're a paint on the canvas. And if that's the way they want to do it, you've signed up. You go and you do it, and you don't pout. And so I learned on that movie, in addition to everything I learned from Terry about just by watching a guy make decisions in real time because of the idiosyncratic approach he has to filmmaking. I also learned how not to pout, which is an important, really, really important lesson. He said, you know who John C. Reilly is, wonderful actor? John's biggest scene, big scene, the reason he did the movie. The scene is not in the movie. But he shot it, and he said, Tim, I should have known better, but we shot the scene, and I felt I was great. And I went up, and I got in Terry's line of sight, because I thought he's going to say, oh, John, what a wonderful iteration of that scene. I never imagined when I was writing it that it could be so alive and present, and it's just going to be the center of the whole picture. I think he was, hoping that's your dream. Terry doesn't say anything, just looks past him, and he says, I've got to know. So he gets right up to Terry and says, Terry, what did you think? And Terry said, John, I just wish sometimes that actors wouldn't speak. And that we could just make a silent picture. And then John waited, because surely he was going to, mollify it in some way. No. So I'll see you tomorrow. And that was it. Yeah.
I believe that silent picture was called To the Wonder, maybe. But moving on from someone who hadn't made a film in 20 years, like Terrence Malick, to people who are much more prolific, let's go from the dark to the light with one of the best films of 2000, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And let's just go ahead and watch the trailer for that film, by the Coen brothers, starring George Clooney, John Turturro, and Tim Blake Nelson. It's wonderful to watch you laugh at those scenes still. Tell us how you met the Coen brothers and how they chose you to be one of the stars of this film, which you have said kind of fell into your lap.
Yeah, they saw my first film, Eye of God, was part of it, and they really liked it, and I became quickly very friendly with Joel. And at the same time, my wife and I became friendly as a couple with Joel and his wife, Frances McDormand, because of my wife's involvement with a organization in New York City called the 52nd Street Project, which works with imperiled kids in Hell's Kitchen and now really all throughout the city. And so we started really to get to know one another and very slowly to see each other socially. And Joel and Ethan just decided that they were trying to cast this role, and I don't know why. I don't think I'd ever done a hick voice for Joel. Maybe it's just because I'm odd looking and they like that, and they love character actors, and they've changed the lives of, they really are, those guys, Joel and Ethan, responsible for the success of some of the, I'm leaving myself out of this, forget about me, but some of the great character actors of this generation have all come up through Joel and Ethan, because they just like, they just have a taste for that. And so you think about Turturro, Buscemi, John Goodman, Fran McDormand, Holly Hunter, and those are just Philip Seymour Hoffman. They gave first significant roles to all of those people I just mentioned. I mean, that's incredible. And many, many more. It doesn't stop there. John Polito, and so Joel I didn't audition, I just got sent the script and they said, we want you to do this. And they really made it work because I was directing another film at the time, and so I had to edit it and deliver it to the Weinstein, well, what was then Miramax. And they funded the edit on their set so that I could play this role and edit with a 6-month-old who's now 19, and he's in the audience, Henry, my son Henry. Who learned to crawl in Jackson, Mississippi while we were shooting this. And so, yeah, they just gave me the role, and it very much changed my life.
Well, we talk about, maybe one thing, how one thing can set up something else, and we think of "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" and its connection, perceived that connection to the Odyssey, and this comment that the Coens never read the Odyssey, but quote, Tim Blake Nelson read it twice while attending Brown University. Before they asked him to play Delmer, the Coens sent Nelson the script and asked him for advice.
That's slightly true. I mean, first of all, they claim they'd never read the Odyssey, and that's just typical of them. And Fargo is based on a true story. If you've seen Fargo, it says it's based on a true story, and obviously it isn't. And they read the Odyssey. And what Joel did do, and they always say, I'm the only one who read the Odyssey, which reminds me of another tiny little funny story. I made this other film called O, that's the one I was directing at the time, that I was shooting, I was editing when I was doing Oh Brother. And I was at a test screening with Bob Weinstein of the Weinstein Company, and he had this beautiful, much younger woman next to him whom he'd brought to the test screening in Secaucus, New Jersey. And O is based on Othello. And I turned around to say hi to Bob, and I'm really anxious because test screenings are these horrible cudgels that the studios use to get you to make the changes they want in a movie, when you direct a movie for the studios. And I turned around, and he's with this beautiful blonde woman who's much younger than I, and Bob is older than I. And he says, Tim, I want you to meet, and I don't even remember her name, let's say it was Tiffany. It should have been. And he says, she's the only one in this whole fucking theater other than you who's actually read Othello. I just thought, okay. But they had read it. Joel sent me the script while I was directing that movie, and he didn't want to spook me in the middle of directing a film by saying, read this, we want you to play one of the leads. So he wrote this card, I still have it, and it said, will you read this, we need some advice. I thought that he wanted to learn what I thought of the adaptation because he knew I'd been a classics major. And I thought to myself, well, I've read the Odyssey, but I'm a Latinist, I really didn't do Greek, so I don't know what I'm going to have to offer unless I read the Odyssey again. So, all right, I'll read it. And I read it, and I thought it was really, really funny. And I also said, God, I'd love to do a day on this, just to play some store clerk or something. But I wouldn't dare ask. And then I called him, and I said, I've read it. And he said, we want you to play this role.
Well, you played Delmer O'Donnell, one of the film's Soggy Bottom Boys, and one of only 2 actors in the film who does his own singing. In the Jailhouse Now is your song. The other actor was one who played Tommy.
Yeah, Chris Thomas King.
And as much a surprise as the film, the album of bluegrass, gospel, blues, my goodness, it becomes not only one of the biggest surprise smash albums, but the Grammy winner for Album of the Year. Do you have a Grammy Award at home?
I do. But you know, I have a son who's a real musician, and I'm learning how little I deserve that Grammy.
Well, I think the film is a true classic, regardless of what Owen Gleiberman seems to think. But it's one I fell for the first time I saw it, and every time I've seen it since, which is many. The kind of movie you just, you're channel surfing, you find it's hard to turn the channel from. It's just, do you consider the film to be a classic, or does it have some special place in your heart or in history that you see?
It has a huge place in my heart because it absolutely changed my life. For all intents and purposes, it's a role I should never have had. I'm proud of what I did. It's not false humility. I think I served the role well. But Brad Pitt wanted to play that role. And he did. And one of the reasons they didn't cast Brad is, and he would have been wonderful. Brad's a wonderful actor. Is because they didn't have time to give everybody close-ups, and they knew they'd have to be doing close-ups of George, which is not because of George, but because he's friggin' Ulysses, and he's also Clark Gable in this movie. I mean, he looks like Clark Gable, and it's appropriate linguistically in the movie, even if he's not George Clooney, that he's given close-ups. It makes total sense. They knew that Turturro is a team player, and they could do 3 shots with him, and when they did a close-up of George, and then did a 3-shot, that John wouldn't have his feelings hurt. And they said, let's just get somebody who's not known to play Delmar, because that'll be also interesting linguistically in terms of the casting, because it's the lowest status character of the trio. And so that's why it suddenly became available to me. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a role that size wouldn't have been available. They never would have considered me. And the studio, because it was the Coen brothers, couldn't say to them, you have to use Brad Pitt. His agent is calling, and they want him in this role, and he wants it. And this could mean, and it would have meant, tens of millions of more dollars for them. And so for all intents and purposes, it's a role I shouldn't have had. So it's, of course, very special to me. But it's also, and I'm talking a lot, and I'm mindful that this is going on, so I'll try to keep this answer somewhat short. It is a historic film for a lot of reasons, but for one very interesting technical one. This is the first complete digital intermediate film. And so, just very, very briefly, what that means is that you used to shoot a film on, people used to shoot a film on film, and then they would do what's called a color timing. And that was done chemically in baths with different chemicals to bring out certain hues and accentuate what you end up seeing as the look of a film. A look can be cold, like a early David Fincher film with lots of icy blues in it, and the fluorescent lights are white and white to blue and very cold or greenish. Or it can be a really warm film, like shot by somebody like Gordon Willis, like The Godfather, where you look at it and it's just all the shots are very golden and the lights are yellow and gold and very beautiful. And that used to be done both in camera, so the way the scene was lit, but then also in the color timing, which was done chemically at a lab. And the director would go with the DP, sometimes not with the DP, and they would work with a colorist and look at it, look at versions of the film, and they would get the bath right for the total look of the movie. But what the bath did, as you can imagine, is it would have a global impact on the look of a frame. So if you're going to make that light there gold, then that light is going to be gold if it's in frame. And the white of this person's shirt here is also, because it's similar, it's a muted version of the white of that light, that's going to go gold, and so's the white in your check, and the white on the print on your shirt, on and on and on. You get it, right? So around the time of this movie called Pleasantville, which you might have seen with with Bill Macy, they started to figure out that you could take, it was very expensive, but you could take frames from a movie and digitize them, so turn them into digital files, and then go in with software and change certain areas of the frame and the colors in the frame, but not have it impact other areas. So you could make that light over there golden, but you could not have it impact the shirt and the writing on your shirt and your shirt in the same way. And then maybe you could make that light less golden than that one, and then make this side a little less golden in the impact of that light than that one. And you could go in and do detail work that wasn't global in the way that inflected the whole frame. And so people started experimenting with that in films like Pleasantville. When Joel and Ethan wanted to make Oh Brother, they're so detail-oriented and they're so smart visually that when they went to Mississippi, it annoyed them that the land, even in the summer, was so verdant and green. And it's just not the look they wanted. They wanted yellow, burned out grass and fields. And so they and Roger Deakins decided that they were going to use this technology for every frame in the movie. Every single frame. And they got Sony to essentially donate 75% of the cost to do this with this brand new technology. Well, and so that's the first digital intermediate. And so every time you see those yellows, that was as green as Mississippi. And they changed that, but it never changed our skin tone, right? You see the point? Because it's not a global change that a bath has. They were able to isolate and go in and do that detailed work. Now, that technology is standard for every movie you see. And this was the first movie that did it. That's not even to mention that, as my son has pointed out, and he's right, he's told me, it gave a rebirth to bluegrass and folk. And you could argue that the influence that has had on indie rock is just absolutely extraordinary. That too is historic. So that's
very good. Well, innovators in more ways than one. And as you were mentioning, you were working on that film, but editing another film as well, and that was O, as you were talking about, the teen drama, a modern-day adaptation of Othello that you directed, and that starred Julia Stiles, Mekhi Phifer, Josh Hartnett, a 2001 film. Let's watch the trailer for that film that Tim directed. It's an interesting balance to have just talked about this real flashpoint in your acting career that comes about, and then we have this film that you're working on around that same time, and then it has some outside forces that affect it. Maybe tell us about that film and working with that up-and-coming cast of young people in it as well, and then the controversy of the delayed release because of Columbine.
I just want to say one of the irritating things about making studio movies is that, and I'm very blessed to have gotten to make this, and it's actually the one film I've made as a writer-director that actually made people money. But that song in the trailer is not in the movie, and it just drives me nuts. Anyway, briefly, while I was editing, before going off to do Oh Brother, Columbine happened, and I guess what I thought would, although it was obviously tragic, and I was heartbroken, particularly having made this film, that another high school shooting had happened, because there were many before Columbine, which is why we made this movie. And there's a shooting in this movie, high school shooting. Columbine happened, and I thought, well, this is let's get the movie out as soon as possible. And Miramax Dimension did not feel this way, and they actually showed it to, without mentioning names, as pretty much as powerful political figure as you could name at that time, and then for years after that. And this person advised against them releasing the movie. And so there was a court battle, and it delayed the release, and finally Miramax put it over to Lionsgate. And the movie ended up getting released right before 9/11, actually, but 2 years after we'd made it, which was really unfortunate, because the movie did well, and it did well around the world too. But I think had it been released in relation to the time that we made it, and I give us credit for having made it at that time, and before you think I'm talking all about me, I didn't write this movie. So I'm talking about the guy who wrote it and had the idea, and the producers who then brought it to me and asked me to make it. And then I was involved, and I wanted to make it because I felt, as they did, that this was really relevant. Because again, there were all these shootings before Columbine. Columbine was just numerically the worst one until Parkland. And the movie should have been out. We got the timing for its power was right and could have been useful, but it was delayed because of some wrong-headed thinking about copycat killings and I think other aspects of the psychological relationship between the Weinsteins and this particular political figure wanting to confirm one another's views because the Weinsteins were interested in attaining power through that person, and that person was interested in their money and their friends' money. And so they were confirming one another's wrong-headed points of view. And the result was this movie being shelved for 2 years.
Well, unusually, when you put it together, it turns out that the release delay on that film puts it coming out not that far away from the release of The Gray Zone, your next film, a 2002 release that was also based on one of your plays, one of your award-winning plays with an Obie Award.
The director won the Obie. I did not. I wish I had. But they'd won other writing awards, but not the Obie.
This film is about Jewish prisoners chosen by the Nazis to help in the extermination of other Jews at the Auschwitz concentration camp. And it's about a rebellion in the camp. And the film stars Harvey Keitel, Mira Sorvino, David Arquette, Steve Buscemi. That's The Gray Zone. If we can look at the trailer for The Gray Zone, written and directed by Tim Blake Nelson. It's, yeah. An interesting fact, one of maybe your earliest collaboration with Circle Cinema, the Oklahoma premiere of The Gray Zone took place at AMC South Roads 20. But it was hosted by Circle Cinema Foundation, clearly before the Circle Cinema had reopened. And it was also hosted by the Jewish Federation of Tulsa, with the proceeds benefiting the Jewish Federation's Eva Unterman Holocaust Education Fund. Maybe you'd like to tell us what ways this film was personal to you.
Well, I tried to write a film about my own family's experience. My mother and her parents were refugees, not survivors, but refugees, meaning they fled Europe because of the Holocaust. And I wrote it. It spent about a little over a year writing it, and it ultimately felt too familiar, too much like other Holocaust stories, and probably not as good or interesting. And so I put it away. I didn't burn it because you write on computers now, and so you don't get to say dramatically that you burned something. But I don't even know where that script is. I don't even think I just think it's lost somewhere. But I kept doing my research, and I found out about the Sonderkommandos in a book by Primo Levi, and I thought, well, there's something that's a story that hasn't been told, and somehow, I mean, I know the story, but the hour grows late, so I'm not going to tell it. But I got somebody to finance it, and I got to go off and make this screenplay of my play. The play had been very successful in New York, but the people who financed the movie hadn't even seen the play and didn't even know it existed. But I just got lucky in terms of picking the right people at the right time to whom to present the material, and they said, if you'll make this in Eastern Europe, we're going to finance it. And I got to go and make it. And it was a great experience.
I'll say a great experience. This is about the time I remind you of this quote you gave the Tulsa World at the time. That shoot was really, really difficult. I didn't get any younger. I would say that when I lived to 75 instead of 80, and people wonder, why didn't he live 5 years longer? If they read my journal from Bulgaria, the answers will lie there.
That's all true. I guess it's a bit like my wife has said about her 3 pregnancies that if you remember them too much about them, you won't want to do it again. And so, although I always tell her I didn't need an epidural, doesn't go over very well. But all right, I know that's obnoxious. I'm sorry. But no, I mean, I could go into all that, but I just want to be mindful of the time. So, and at another time, I will always come back to Circle when they want me. So, but yes, it was difficult.
Well, obviously, Oh Brother afforded you other opportunities coming up in your acting, and in 2002, you take a foray into science fiction, which is something you have increasingly appeared in over the years, that genre, and that is Minority Report, directed by Steven Spielberg. And let's see a clip of Tim, Minority Report. So you're working in these 2 films with him a decade apart, but as to Minority Report, you make a request the first time working with him that Spielberg's people called about not taking the role unless you could read the script, which is something I suppose not every actor says to Steven Spielberg's people. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I was editing The Gray Zone, and I was offered Minority Report, and my agent called and said, Steven Spielberg has offered you a role in his new film. It's a science fiction film based on a Philip K. Dick short story. And I said, oh, that sounds fantastic. And we're told the role is very flashy. And I said, you're told. So have you read it? No script. Do you want to do it? And I don't. It struck me as I really wanted to work with him. I was completely honored. It was before Oh Brother had come out. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's true. Yes, it was before Oh Brother had come out. He had seen Oh Brother at Barry Sonnenfeld's house in the Hamptons in his screening room. Barry Sonnenfeld was the Coen brothers' first DP, and then he went on to direct the Men in Black movies and many other commercially successful franchises. And I just thought, I came up through the theater. I always read, I always know the role I'm going to be playing. And it's just as important for me to know whether I am going to be able to succeed for the director as it is to know whether it's worth my time. So it was certainly worth my time to go and work with Steven. There was no doubt in my mind. But it felt strange to me that I just wasn't given the opportunity to do my own evaluation of what the terms were for playing this role. And so I said I'd like to read the script, and they said that's just not happening. And I said, well, can you describe? No. And I said, I would like to speak to Steven Spielberg. So the next day, I'm in the editing room, and the assistant editor comes in, rather breathless, and says, Steven Spielberg is on the phone for you. And I said, great. And I was a little anxious, but I said, hello, Mr. Spielberg, thank you so much for offering me this role. And he says, what do you want to talk to me about? And I said, well, I'd love just to get a sense of what the role is and to be able to read the script. And there was a pause, and he said, "Great, we're going to get it sent to you." And he sent it to me, and it made sense to me. The role made sense to me for me to play, although all my ideas were not what he wanted. And so when I got to the set the first day, and that was this weird summer where I did 3 films that all overlapped with one another while I was doing the sound edit on Grey Zone. And so I did this movie up in Northern California called Cherish with my buddy Finn Taylor. And then I went right into this other movie called The Good Girl, directed by Miguel Arteta and written by Mike White, 2 wonderful guys, filmmakers. And then I literally went right on the day that I finished Good Girl right onto the set of Steven's movie. And then that night I was sound editing. I mean, it was a crazy summer. And we had 2 of the boys at that point, and we decamped to Los Angeles, and Lisa and Henry and our middle boy Teddy were there. It was crazy. And I had this big monologues in this movie, Minority Report. And I'd learned them, and I just had this notion that I'd been just making choices that were too damn strong with my characterizations. And I wanted to pull it back for this one, particularly since I had so much to say. It was just so torrential. The verbiage, it was just, he just wouldn't shut up, kind of like me tonight. And so I came in with these subtle choices, and I was called to Tom Cruise's big, huge trailer bus complex mansion. And Stephen and Tom are sitting there, and I've memorized all this material. And the first thing they do is they say, "We've got some changes." And they start changing, I mean, single verbs, definite articles, making plurals out of singulars, removing an and. I mean, it's all this really minuscule, picayune stuff. And I think, fucking hell, I've memorized this. And they've made probably 30 changes. And how am I going to do this? And then I start reading the scene with Tom, and Stephen says, "What are you doing?" And I said, he said, "You're just lying there with this role. This is not why I hired you. It's not what I want. What do you, it's so, I don't want subtlety." And so we tried this and that, and I'm trying to give him what he wants, and I'm starting to get very anxious, and Tom is remaining very positive, as he is. And then finally Stephen says, "Can you do a Boston accent?" And I said, because you never say no. I said yes, but actually I kind of could, because I'd gone to school in New England. And that's why the guy speaks that way. And it just unlocked everything. And that's that. And then the second time with Lincoln, I just said, "I don't need to read it. I'm in."
Very good. Well, this becomes a time of following Minority Report and other events. This becomes a time, 2003, 4, 5, 6, when you're becoming a truly in-demand character actor. And we're going to show some clips in a period there, a 3-year period in which you appear in 18 films, which include one of my children's favorites from that time, Holes, based on a great novel. as well as movies as diverse as Scooby-Doo 2, Meet the Fockers, and Syriana. So, drama, comedy, a little bit of everything. Let's see those clips if we could, please.
So, very excited about that.
Well, we will look forward to this project, which is not really what I was led to believe at all.
Yeah, yeah. And if
Very
it's a
good.
movie, and I can do it, I would love to come and present it here. Yeah.
And in a different vein, in a project I know you can say less about, back in the world of costumed heroes, there is Watchmen, a planned HBO series shooting a pilot for, I know, and that's about it, based on the stories contained in arguably the most revered graphic novel ever created. You were one of the first people announced in the casting, so there's a Tulsa connection, and then come the reports that the story will be set in Tulsa, which I can confirm that the Tulsa World was contacted as well for newspapers to use on the set. And so if you can tell us what you can about Watchmen, please.
Yeah, I'm bound not to talk about it, but everything you've said is true. And I can say that the guy who's making it, Damon Lindelof, who made Lost and The Leftovers, is an incredibly smart, sensitive, thoughtful guy who loves the source material, and I think has found a way to revere it and also depart from it in ways that are responsible and coherent and inventive, and it felt irresistible to me. And so I don't lie awake at night thinking, can I get back on television? But this just felt like something I had to do. And I've shot the pilot along with Regina King is the lead, and Jeremy Irons is in it. And I think it's going to be pretty exciting if they go ahead and make it, which I believe they will, as a series.
Mm-hmm.
And HBO, it's not really television. It's like shooting a feature film.
Absolutely, and that will feel like a bit of a Tulsa homecoming when we do get to see that with you involved. And on that note, I'll quote you once again, as you told me several years ago in response to coming home often during your career, to quote the writer Alfred Urey, Driving Miss Daisy, one of his. He's from Atlanta. As he once told you, you said, "Find a tiny, tiny corner of the universe that you know really well and write about that. If you write specifically, that's how you mine greater truths. And Oklahoma is like that for me." So I would say that Oklahoma and Tulsa are better for that kind of thinking on the part of our guests tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank Tim Blake Nelson for his time.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you, Tim.
Everybody's talking at me. I don't hear words.